These are two sisters, Amanda and Adeline Finch. They were only 3 years old and 4 years old when they passed away. Their parents were John Finch and Elsie Beagle. John was the first wagon maker in Kendallville, and he also had a repair shop for wagons in Corona. John was the Justice of Peace of Corona, and they traveled back and forth between Kendallville and Corona, and then eventually they moved to Rome City and also had a house in Corona, so they would travel back and forth. First by horse and buggy, and then eventually by train. When John Finch owned a car, he kept it in the livery stable in the winter in Corona. He was one of the first people to have a car. James, who was the son of, or it was actually Adeline and Amanda's brother, returned to Corona each week to mow the lawn while the family was staying in Rome City. Once his wife requested that he check on the sauerkraut while he was in Corona, and he remarked, how was he supposed to tell if it was still good or not, because it always smelled spoiled. James's son, so it would be the nephew of Amanda and Adeline, was Frank J. Finch, who became a political cartoonist who actually achieved national fame. He was called the Doc Bird political cartoonist. And there's John and Elsie Finch. That's Adeline and Amanda's parents. This is Skinner and Elizabeth Bloomfield, and Skinner is a War of 1812 veteran. He was from the Skinner Keys Regiment of Ohio in the War of 1812. He's not actually buried here. He's buried in Richland County, Ohio. His descendants got irritated because his stone got broke when it was in Ohio, and they decided when their mother died to move Skinner's stone with Elizabeth's stone, but they left his body in Ohio. Unfortunately, although they were hoping that Kendallville would take better care of Skinner's grave, it broke in the vandalism that happened in 2007, and you can see where the break is. Elizabeth's had broken sometime prior to the 2007. Probably around the 1930s, they tried to repair it. My dad James Wells, is most proud of this one because it was actually really, really difficult to get it standing again. It was broken in at least 4 pieces, and along the back there is large chunks of concrete from where they had tried to put it back together, which actually just made more pieces of it break off. Now, Elizabeth Bloomfield moved here with her sons in 1853, and at the country's first call for war in the Civil War, five of their sons joined the Union Army. So at one point in time, 5 of her sons were in the service. Cornelius died in the fall of 1862, the first son. And then she had more children. She still had 5 children, 5 girls and 3 boys at home, while she still had 5 children facing rebel cannons, is what it said. Cornelius, their son, died at Stone River. And Amos mustered out in August of 1865. He's buried here also. He served in Company I of the 129th Regiment in the Indiana Infantry. I'm not for sure who all is buried here. The last name is Johnson. I think the first name might be Adeline. There's another name that's been carved into the concrete, but this is, it's a handmade stone using poured concrete, and I believe that the reason it's left in the middle is so that it could be used as a planter. And they could plant flowers here to honor the dead. Originally held a photograph, either on a tintype or an ambrotype or a daguerreotype even. And they would have put it there, the image of the person who had passed away. Okay, this is Mary Myna, Mary Brown Myna. She was the daughter of Silas, who was a Revolutionary War soldier. her brother, Asa Brown, Mary Brown Minot's brother, arrived soon after 1840 in Lisbon. He built the first frame house in Allen Township and erected a steam sawmill. He also built an ashery and manufactured black and white salts, which I'm not sure what that is, but it was apparently a big deal. Some said he was a grasping man at financial affairs, and he was not far-seeing, and he ruined Lisbon when he refused to sell the corner and other valuable lots, and by steadfastly denying that he was under any obligation to use his influence in securing the location of the railroad through the town. So according to the history books, Asa Brown is the reason that Lisbon did not become as successful as Kendallville. So that's Mary's brother. He also opened up an entertainment house for travelers known as the Halfway House, which was halfway between Sturgis and Fort Wayne. Dances were held there, and one of the first trials of the Blacklegs was held at Asa Brown's house. Now, Samuel Myna, who's buried right here, was an early pioneer also. He owned the first store in Kendallville and also bought all of the land surrounding where Height Funeral Home is now. That's called Myna Addition. He called his house, or he established the post office in his store, and he platted a small addition. The names of the streets that he had in his addition were Silver, Gold, Iron, and Copper, and it was bordered by Diamond Street and Water Street. And Silver Street and Gold Street still exist. Gold Street is the location of the first frame house in Kendallville, and Copper and Iron are now State and Oak. This is Eliza Lewis. She died in 1891. She was 63 years old. She has one of the other granite stones in the cemetery. It was vandalized several years ago and was spray painted. She wanted to be buried next to her mother. She had told her friends and left money for her burial place, and she said that she wanted to be buried next to her mother, but her mother did not have a stone. Her mother's name was Zilpha Lewis, and by the time she died in 1891, nobody could remember where her mother was buried. They just remembered that it was next to a tree, so they found a tree stump that was here in the cemetery, and they buried her next to this tree stump, hoping that it was next to her mother. This is Veretta and Frances Anderson. Frances is the mother of Veretta, and she also had about 8 other kids. When we first started restoring this area of the cemetery, this stone was missing, and we searched all the way around this, probed it with the permission from the state, probed it to find the stone, and it was actually in the complete opposite corner of the cemetery is where we found it. But this is where it was marked they're buried, so this is where we replaced the stone. Frances said that she was half Potawatomi Indian, and then she was half African American. This family, the Anderson family that settled in Noble County in the 1860s, were the descendants of freed black people from southern Indiana. They originally worked, the 3 brothers that moved here were Alonzo, Jerry, and Zimriah, and Frances was married to Jerry. And they moved to DeKalb County, opened up a barber shop there after doing some intern work in Fort Wayne, and then they moved to Kendallville and opened a barber shop and a hairdressing salon on Main Street. It's been very interesting to read about this family and about how Kendallville reacted to having an African American family living in Kendallville shortly after the Civil War, and they lived here until the 19-teens. They moved to Chicago sometime between 1914 and 1920, so they lived here until then. Frances died of consumption, and they had the funeral at the Methodist Church here in town. They were active members of that church, which was a huge step for Kendallville community compared to the communities. Veretta died when she was just 15 years old. She was their 2nd oldest child. But Frances, 2 of her other children, Frances and Jerry's children, went on to actually become very well known. Their son Warner became the first African American to graduate from Fort Wayne Medical School, and he went on to become a doctor. Their daughter Cora went to medical school in Chicago and became a nurse. Now, she became nationally famous for about 2 weeks in 1914 for a very, very, very scandalous story. She had been living as a man for 10 years with another woman, and it was for purely financial reasons, she said in the newspaper. She couldn't make as much money as a colored woman who was single as she could as a South American man who was married. She and her first wife fought, and Cora moved to Chicago for a while, moved back to Milwaukee, Wisconsin, where all this took place, and she actually legally married a Caucasian woman in 1914. Her first wife got angry and turned her into the police. And the thought of a woman who had lived for so long as a man in men's clothing holding down a man's job in 1914 became national news. And she was born in Kendallville, Indiana. This is Martha Anderson. She was the wife of Zimriah. She died in 1869. She was only 19 years old. She had just lost her daughter a few years before, Rozzy. This is the wife of Zimriah Anderson. Zimriah died in the 1880s. He was part of the partnership of barbers on Main Street, but he decided to go visit some people in Michigan and thought the train wasn't going to stop at his stop, and he jumped off the train and was caught underneath it, and it amputated both of his legs, and he died. So that's where Zimriah is, and this is his wife. And the third brother, Alonzo Anderson, who's buried in Lakeview Cemetery. He actually served as the only colored troops from Indiana. He served as a part of the colored troops. He also built one of the Seven Sisters buildings on Main Street. The one that's nearest to Family Video that has no name was built by Alonzo Anderson, who was an African-American barber on Main Street. This is Wilhemina Door and her son Christian. She came from Germany and landed in New York City on April 15, 1865, which was the date of Lincoln's assassination, or the date of his death. She saw the cemetery as she was coming into town, and she said, "This is where I want to be buried when I die." And unfortunately, within 2 weeks, she was granted her wish. She was married to Christian Sr., and he was a watchmaker, and it said that his store was an attractive place of cogs and wheels merrily spinning and whirling, and one would sometimes whisper to the other that old Mr. Door was trying to find the secret of perpetual motion. This is Martha Baker MacGregor. She was married to Robert MacGregor. She's the youngest daughter of Mercy Hopkins Mott and Alphys Baker. Mercy and Alphys had a very large family, and Alphys had 4 children, Mercy had 3 children, and then they had 4 together, and Martha was the youngest one. They were born, Alphys and Mercy were born in Vermont. They lived in Ohio, and then they settled in Indiana in 1836. Alphys's team of horses was stolen the first night after his arrival by the Blacklegs, causing hardship for his family. An early story from Noble County involved Alphys Baker, and I thought it was kind of creepy and awesome. Elihu Wadsworth was walking in his woods and saw a log that looked odd. He split off a portion of it and saw a human inside. A human had hollowed it out, and there was a human inside. It was the body of a Native American woman who had been dead only a few days. Several days later, Mr. Baker cremated the body, which was the first cremation in the township.